What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the Prince of Peace? Is Jesus a prince because the Father is a king? Stay with me as we explore the last name in Isaiah 9:6, the Prince of Peace. So it is generally true that princes are like sons to a king, in the same way princesses are daughters, right? And the prince is also a heir. Sometimes, while the king is still alive, the prince takes on royal duties and he receives treatment that is befitting of the king. But this is not the sense in which Jesus is the Prince of Peace. I mean, God the Father is not going anywhere. His throne is from everlasting to everlasting. So Jesus is not a heir like that. As a matter of fact, Jesus is reigning right now. He's King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So he cannot be a prince in the sense of a king father and a prince son. He also sits on the throne at the right hand of the Father. So then, who is a Prince of Peace, or a prince like Isaiah 9:6 describes? Let me take it home a little bit. In the Yoruba culture, there is a chieftain called the Balogun. The Balogun is like the minister of defense or the chief of the army staff. He's the commander in chief of the armed forces. In our culture, this is the closest thing to being a prince as the Bible describes. So a prince leads his people to war. So in that vein, we can see kings also described as princes. So in this sense, a prince is not a royal title, as it were. It is a military title. We can see one example in 1 Samuel 18:30. It mentions the princes of the Philistines. And now, these are not necessarily the sons of the king, or they are just the leaders of the military. So this describes the Philistines' military leaders across their 5 different provinces. So a prince is a commander, the commander of an army. Now let's talk about what peace is. There's this popular video online where a daughter was pretending like a chef and she asked her father, "What would you like to order?" And the father says, "Some peace and quiet." The daughter says, "We don't have that here."
What would you like for today? What would you like for today?
For the whole day?
Yeah.
I'd like some peace and quiet.
No, we don't tell that.
So peace and quiet is something we hear often, but it does not tell the true picture of what peace is. When we look through the scriptures, we see that peace does not mean everywhere is quiet and serene and nothing is happening. No. As we will soon see from the scriptures, peace is a military terminology. It means an end to war. So without a background of war, we cannot really appreciate the full meaning of what peace is. So without a background of war, we cannot appreciate what the true meaning of peace is. Without war, there's no reference for what peace looks like. So a conversation of peace is just... Now, before I explain my reasoning why I think peace is a military terminology, there are 2 ways peace can be achieved. One is by compromise, where you come into a mutual agreement with the enemy and say, "We don't want any more bloodshed, cease fire." That way, peace comes by negotiation. You sit with the enemy and you agree on terms. You drop your standard, they drop their standard, and you find a common ground for peace. Now, the second way peace is achieved is by obliteration, a total and complete victory in such a way that the enemy never survives or they never dare to stand in your way again. So when you are at peace, have you negotiated with your weaknesses and come to an agreement, or you have obtained total victory? We'll come back to that. Well, let me share with you two examples why I think peace is a military terminology. Two examples that solidify peace as a military terminology. Romans 16:20. It says that the God of peace will soon crush the enemy under your feet. Some say the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. Of course, we can see that peace here, the God of peace here, is not negotiating with the enemy. He's crushing the enemy, defeating the enemy in such a way that he never survives it. Another example of peace being a military terminology is in Judges 6, especially verse 24. In fact, this is the first place where the word Jehovah Shalom is recorded. It's the story of Gideon. Israel was under the oppression and the occupation of Midian. And Gideon had an encounter with God in such a way that God showed himself as Jehovah Shalom, God my peace. Now, if you understand what happened to the Midianites, you know that peace is not a mushy or a soft terminology. It is a terminology of absolute victory. So much victory that for 40 years, nobody ever dared to stand against Israel. That is what peace looks like. I also want to share one example of where there was some sort of peace, but not absolute. In 2 Kings 13:15 to 18, Elisha on his sickbed was visited by the king of Judah. And then Elisha instructed the king to shoot an arrow. After shooting the arrow, he prophesied that you have victory. Then he also instructed him to take the rest of the arrows and strike the ground. And then he did it 3 times. And then what did Elisha do? Elisha did, I wish he had done that more than 3 times. You will only have victory 3 times. So it shows that there was peace, but for a short time. Time will fail me to talk about Solomon, who is also synonymous with peace. But if you don't know his father, you will not understand or appreciate what peace was like. David won a great victory for Israel that Solomon had 40 years of peace. The fear of his father and the military power was instilled in the heart of all the enemies. That for 40 years of his son's reign, after he was gone, long gone, there was still peace. And then to the New Testament, Paul talks about peace a lot, but this time not in physical conflict. He talks about peace in our heart. And remember, being a military term is not just quiet. It's talking about a war in the heart. If anybody understands spiritual warfare, trust me, Paul is one of those. And then he constantly referred to peace. Peace, essentially demonstrating and acknowledging that the reality of the conflict between the natural and the spiritual, between the flesh and the spirit. But he speaks so much of peace, assuring us that there is a way of victory where the flesh no longer has an upper hand. In fact, when we talk about the whole armor of God, guess what? The feet are shod with the sandals of the preparation of the gospel of peace. You don't wear armor to the swimming pool. You don't wear armor to play sports. Well, maybe American football. But the whole armor of God is a picture of a soldier well kitted. And then the feet are shod with the gospel of the preparation of peace, showing that even in spiritual things, it is by the gospel we prevail. It is by the gospel we tread upon serpents and scorpions. It's by the gospel we crush the head of the enemy. So with all of this, we know that peace is not a mushy, soft, spineless accommodation or toleration of the enemy or anything that is oppressing you. Peace is a military terminology. Apologies for changing your perspective about peace. It's not me, it's the scriptures. I know you'll never see peace the same way again, and that is good. If God promises you peace, He's not promising you an absence of war. He's promising victory. So prepare for victory, but ensure you're not a casualty. So Jesus is the Prince of Peace. He leads us to victory. Not just a one-time victory, not just a 40-year victory, but an eternal victory. A victory so great that we will never ever see the enemy again for all of eternity. So next time you hear this verse, don't forget what it is about. Even though we say it in the midst of soft songs and carols and all, know that peace is a military terminology. Jesus is the Prince of Peace, the leader of the armies of heaven, the Lord of hosts. He leads us to victory. And so when you hear peace, think victory, not just once, not just twice, but victory forever. God bless you.